Good morning, neighbors. How you guys doing this morning? Good. My name is Graham Cowgill. I'm one of the pastors here. Tell you what, last service I nailed this and run through. It took me about 8 minutes to put this sweater on. So this is a huge question mark in the service. So far so good. A little tight on the cardigan. Let me go ahead and tell you why I don't feel awkward doing this, though it looks like I'm supremely awkward. Because Mr. Rogers started every one of his episodes like this, every single one. He would change his shoes, and he would put on his sweater every single time. He did it for a few reasons. One was Mr. Rogers had this belief that everybody needed to slow down. That was a huge message of his. He actually wanted to force that in the lives of people. Slow down, right? Actually, you see behind me, if you're a Mr. Rogers fan, you'll recognize the traffic light that he had on the set of every one of his episodes. At the beginning of every episode, he would have it set to yellow as this subliminal message just for everybody to slow down. Don't let life pass you by. So I wanted to do that also. And the other reason that he did that at the beginning of every episode was he believed that one of the biggest needs in the lives of a child is consistency. Mr. Rogers would say that if a child feels consistency, that he gains this sense of stability, gains a sense of security from that. And so, was every episode the same? No, that would have been really boring. But he thought that if he could give him something consistent at the beginning, it would give him this sense of security, it would give him courage enough to even face whatever that episode would bring. I thought this week as I was preparing this message, what if, dream with me, but what if people could count on our love? What if our love was so consistent that people could rely on it? In the shifting landscape of every day, that your love for them, that your words to them, that your words to somebody else about them were so saturated with value and life that it became a consistency in somebody's life. What if? How much better would this world look? Now, do we have 2 days that are the same? We'll never have 2 moments that are the same, right? That would be boring. But the consistency of love, I believe, in somebody's life will give somebody the courage to face whatever the episode of life brings them. We want to be people who are so consistent with the way that we value people that people can hang their hats, count on, rely on, depend on the way that we treat people. If you were here last week, we rolled out this war cry for Shoreline Church. We said, collectively and individually, what we want for 2020, we want to be a church that is known for being simply irresistible, if you were here last week. Simply irresistible. We think that the message of Jesus is simply irresistible. We believe that the life of Jesus was simply irresistible. Man, if you read through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the eyewitness accounts of Jesus' time here on earth. If you read through those, you will see how incredibly simple Jesus' life was and still so compelling. People were drawn to Jesus. Matter of fact, broken people, screwed up people, big-time misfits, ordinary, underwhelming people like us were drawn to Jesus. And the reason was because when Jesus came, his message was boiled down to 2 things. He said, all right, here it is. Let me kind of reframe, let me refocus you. God is love, and you are valuable. Everywhere he went, he wanted to communicate those 2 things. God is love, not just that God loves, God is love. It's his characteristic, it's a defining nature of his, and you are valuable. And the reason that hit so hard is because he came in the middle of this religious structure where the Pharisees, the teachers of the time, had complicated things so much. And so in a religious hierarchy, if you were known as a screw-up, if you were a misfit, then you were discounted. You were ostracized. You were forgotten about. And then here comes Jesus with this message to every person that he saw. God is love. You are valuable. He says to these people, man, you're not valuable because of what you do, good or bad. You are valuable because your Creator says so. There's a beautiful quote by Mr. Rogers, and he says this: I don't think anyone can grow unless he's loved exactly as he is now, appreciated for what he is rather than what he will be. Isn't that beautiful? So we thought the perfect series to start 2020 with Simply Irresistible is a series with Mr. Rogers, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, because in my humble opinion, he might be the best modern day example of the gospel lived out day to day. Like really, at least in a high profile case, right? You watch his life and it's just like, dude, he got it. He loved people. And so we're going to today answer two questions. Well, one's a question, the other is a component of the question that I think are necessary for this to be an operating system of ours. The very first one is we're going to answer the question, who is our neighbor? Who is our neighbor? Who are you talking about? If you say love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, strength, and mind, love your neighbors yourself, then who are we talking about? And then the second is a component of loving your neighbor that I believe is so profound that if we had this statement that I talk about on our tombstone at the end of our life, it would be a life worth lived. I believe that. So our first point, the question, who is our neighbor? Luke 10, verse 25, you've probably heard at least part of this story before. But one day, an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question. So this happened all the time. Jesus was one of the most followed, sought after, had buzz around him teachers known as rabbis of the time. And because his presence was such a disruption to the religious institute, because he had this message of intrinsic value rather than earned value, then the Pharisees didn't like him because their value was all earned. And so they would show up at every one of his teachings and they would like make a line or stand up or ask questions to try to disrepute him, to try to discredit him, to make him catch him in a lie. Not just to like make him look foolish, but he's making these claims of being the Son of God to disprove that. So that's what's happening in this scenario. This guy says, teacher, right, stands up. And all the other Pharisees are always like rooting each other on. Like, come on, maybe this is the guy who does it, right? Mythbusters. Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus replied, what does the law of Moses say? How do you read it? The man answered, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, that is not what the law of Moses said. So it is very obvious that this guy has been like at another Jesus seminar and heard Jesus say that, right? Because that was Jesus' interpretation. And so now he's coming and he's giving Jesus' answer back to him. That's what's going on. So Jesus is like, right. Nailed it, right? Well done. Do this and you will live. And then all the other Pharisees in the room were like, nice question, moron. Like, what do you blew it. And the guy like quickly is like, okay, hold on, take it easy. The man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? I don't know if he said it like that, but that's how I read it, right? Just thinking that's his mic drop. So Jesus replies with a story, which I love about Jesus. He always, if somebody asks him a question, he usually responds with a parable, which is this made-up story that has a point to it, you know? And you know what they say about a parable, it's better than one bull. I love that joke so much. I even love more how much people hate that joke. All right. So Jesus replies with a story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. Then a temple assistant walked over. So these are like religious professionals of the day, and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along. So at that point in the story, everybody's like, boo! Because Samaritans were hated. They were hated because at one point Israel was split into two kingdoms. You had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and there was animosity between the two kingdoms. Okay? And there was not only tension there, but this outside force, these people, the Assyrians, who were like bad dudes, they were a brutal people, kept invading Israel, and every time they did, they would torture and kill the Jews, torture and kill the Israelites. And so the Assyrians take over the northern kingdom that the southern kingdom already hated, and once the Assyrians take them over, the capital was Samaria. The Samaritans, the Israelites there, begin to intermarry with the Assyrians. And so the southern kingdom is like, we knew it. Like, we knew you guys were stooges, right? So they hate them. They called them half-bloods. Like, they hated these people, right? Called them dogs. So he says Samaritans, and everybody's just like, yeah. All right, and when he saw the man, when the Samaritan sees this man, half dead, beaten on the ground, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine, which must be better than it sounds. It sounds awful, but whatever. And bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day, so this isn't just like a, hey, God be with you, good luck, don't pick your scabs type of thing. All right, the next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. Now, Jesus asked, which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, the one who showed him mercy. Then Jesus said, yes. Now go and do the same. So, we are going to answer this question simply today, just the way that Jesus does. And who is our neighbor? Who is my neighbor? The answer is anyone in my path. Who is your neighbor? Anyone in my path. One more time. Who is your neighbor? Anyone in my path. I believe that we have so many opportunities in a given day to meet needs of people that we come in contact with. How many times do we just look past? How many times do we ignore? How many times do we think, well, who really needs my service? Who really deserves it? And we really, if we think about the course of a day, how many opportunities do we have to love? How many opportunities do we have to be a neighbor? Now, this guy asking about the word neighbor, he's asking with like a mentality of exclusivity. He's thinking it's exclusive, right? Neighbor is an exclusive word. Who is in and who is out? That's what he's thinking. Pretty much he's like, what is the least amount of work that I need to do and still get God credit for loving, right? Who is in, who is out? And Jesus is saying, bro, your mentality is all wrong. Your motive is all wrong. Neighbor is not an exclusive word. Neighbor is an inclusive word. We're constantly asking, who can we add to our neighborhood? Not who can we discount. And so we learn this truth. If you're looking for an excuse to avoid, you're never looking for a way to love. If you're looking for an excuse to avoid, you're never looking for a way to love. Fair warning, this illustration's a little brutal, but has anybody here ever seen the movie Blood Diamond? Great movie. If you haven't seen it, it's sensational. But in this movie, in Africa, there is this rebel army called the RUF, Revolutionary United Front, and pretty much their whole purpose, this rebel army, is to strike fear into the hearts of people in Africa through death. And what's terrifying and heartbreaking about this is that the RUF, their foot soldiers, are made up almost entirely of children. If you've seen the movie, there is actually a progression that they take the children on who become a part of this rebel army to dehumanize people. Again, this is graphic, but in the movie, they take this child. They put a machine gun in his hand, and they blindfold him. They have him pull the trigger and then take off the blindfold to see the person that they've shot. The next stage, put the machine gun in his hand, and the kid is not wearing a blindfold this time, but the person that he's shooting has his back turned toward him so he doesn't look at his face. The next stage is they have the person that the kid is going to shoot turn and face the child, but this time they put the bandana over the person being shot's face. So he's looking at him face to face, but doesn't see his face yet. And the final step of dehumanizing is when he can look the other person in the eye, shoot, not seeing a person anymore. The idea is if you can dehumanize, now you're just seeing it as carrying out orders, right? Objectifying the person to where you look straight through him. You don't see him as a person. I thought, yes, of course, to a far, far lesser degree. But I think that every one of us have actually put ourselves through a progression like that to dehumanize. I think that every one of us, in one form or another, has trained ourselves to objectify people, to look past the needs of people. Maybe in a self-protective way, so that we can sleep at night, so that we can live with ourselves. Man, maybe this has been you, this has been me at a time in my life where you know that when you leave Walmart, that homeless guy who's asking for money is at that exit. And so to avoid the whole situation completely, you take the other exit so you don't even have to deal with that. But eventually you realize, man, taking the other exit is wasting too much time, so you go through the exit that he's there, but you go a lane over so that you're not near him, so that you're not forced with those emotions, so that you can avoid those. Well, another few months pass, and you're willing to pull up next to him, but you avert eye contact. Again, so that you don't see him as a person, so that you objectify and look past the needs, and finally, you don't even realize when it happens, but you are living your life and you are able to avoid completely the existence of that person in need. We do it all the time. And it's not just with this homeless example. We objectify and dehumanize. You know why? Really? Because we are terrified at the level of involvement that it might require from us. Man, I'm the worst at this. This is not a high horse thing. Man, if I'm honest, when do I serve? When do I love? Man, I serve most, I'm a human, when it's an ego stroke. I serve when it fits my strategy. I serve when it's convenient. But man, love is not selfish. Love is not strategic. Love is not convenient. Serving people, loving people is to prioritize other people's needs even above ours. Love is selfless. Love is without agenda. Love is inconvenient. And look, I know, trust me, I know that this hits hard. I had to look at this the whole week, right? It is brutal. But remember, this is not shame and guilt. We don't walk out of here with our heads down. It's the exact opposite. We say we don't want to call each other out. We call each other up. That God is saying that the world thinks this way. We have trained ourselves to be aligned with what the world says is logical. My love is not logical. My love is not convenient. And man, in the face of the darkness of this world, light shines that much brighter. This is opportunity for us to go countercultural and love people into value. So, we walk out of here opportunistic. Mr. Rogers has this quote where he talks to us and says, man, think about those times that you've done this well. I hope you're proud of yourself for the times that you said yes, when all it meant was extra work for you and was seemingly helpful only to someone else. You know the reason that you feel good inside of that moment is because you are the closest aligned to how God has designed you to live. He's designed us to be fulfilled when we love well, when we serve, when we think outside of ourselves. And so, man, my hope is that through 2020, this is not a shame thing. This is an exciting thing that God has given us opportunities to love. And at the end of this year, we have 50 stories of when we stepped into somebody's needs, not knowing what was required of us, and God showed up in a supernatural way to prove to that person that he loves them. We can become a church that embodies that love. We can become individuals whose love is so consistent that people can depend on them. It gives them courage throughout the day. So who is your neighbor? Anyone in your path. Who is your neighbor? Anyone in your path. Second, this component that I believe is so necessary, it's foundational for us to love. And actually, the people that I know who I would consider the most Christ-like are the people who embody this characteristic. Another quote from Mr. Rogers, we get so wrapped up in numbers in our society. The most important thing is that we are able to be one-to-one, you and I, with each other at the moment. If we can be present to the moment with the person that we happen to be with, that's what's important. The characteristic that I'm thinking of, that I've seen people embody, is being present. Beautiful story. So Jesus, at one point, he's with his disciples. His disciples are like his homeboys, right? His closest followers. And they're in this town. And then in another town of Bethany, we have Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. All three of them are brothers and sisters, and they're all close personal friends of Jesus. Well, Lazarus becomes deathly ill. And Mary and Martha send word to Jesus in this other town, and they say, hey, our brother, your buddy Lazarus, is sick. He is going to die if you don't do something. So, don't know what you're doing over there, but wrap it up, right? Come on back and help your boy out. Do your Jesus thing, right? Do that Son of God thing. And so Jesus in this other town gets the word and does not go back. He stays where he is. And the disciples are like, they don't get it. They're like, dude, what are you doing? And Jesus says to him, he goes, look, you guys aren't going to understand this, but I actually need Lazarus to die for me to do a miracle that's going to call attention to God's power and goodness in a new way. And he's right, they don't get it. But another few days passes, Lazarus dies, and eventually Jesus says, okay, it's time, to his disciples, let's go back. So they begin to head back to Judea. Now, a little spoiler alert here. This is how the story ends, because I know some of you guys are just on the edge of your seats. All right. John 11, verse 39. Roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. Jesus responded, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe? So they rolled the stone aside. Then Jesus looked up to heaven and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I said it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here, so that they will believe you sent me. Then Jesus shouted, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. Incredible miracle that calls attention not only to God's power, but calls attention to who Jesus is. And here's why I wanted to tell this story. I want to backtrack just a little bit in this story. When Jesus gets word that Lazarus is dead, and he says to his disciples, all right, it's time to go back, and they begin to head to Judea. As they're going into town, Mary and Martha run out to meet Jesus. Lazarus is dead, and they run out, and they are beyond distraught. They are just inconsolable, weeping, wailing. I'm sure they're like, "What? Where were you? If you were here, he wouldn't have died." I'm sure they have balled fists, right? Like beating him against his chest. Like, what are you doing? You could have stopped this. And it says that Jesus, in that moment, was so moved to compassion. That shortest verse in the entire Bible, John 11, verse 35, says, Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Moved to weep. Here's why I think that's amazing. is because Jesus knows in another 30 minutes, this is a non-issue. Think about that. He told his disciples, Lazarus needs to die for me to do this miracle. He knew what he was going back for. And despite the fact that he knew this was all going to be okay and turn out for good, he doesn't lead with, hey, Mary, Martha, let's relax. Give me like an hour, okay? Settle down, guys. I promise this isn't going to be a big deal in another 30 minutes. Knowing the outcome, knowing everything is going to be okay, he is so moved to compassion that he weeps for something he knows is going to be a non-issue in 30 minutes. How's that for being present? That only comes from meeting somebody in their grief, right? That only comes from meeting somebody in their pain. Sometimes everything's going to be fine, just doesn't cut it. A lot of times that discounts pain. But when you have somebody who is willing to weep with you, to sit with you in the middle of grief, to sit with you in the middle of turmoil, that communicates, I'm not going anywhere. I will be with you as long as you need me. I will be right here. When I was in the Air Force, I went into the Air Force when I was 21, and basic training, 8 weeks long. And going in at 21, I understood what basic was. Like, I got the game part of it, right? So the idea of basic is they want to break everybody down, then instill the Air Force core values, and then kind of build everybody back up with a new operating system, right, with similar language. That's the idea. So it wasn't like I was above that at all. I just understood what they were going to do. So I understood there were going to be yellings that were unwarranted, right? And it was the Air Force. And man, in the Air Force, things get brutal. And when they break you down, I mean, there were some days that we had cheese danishes that were like room temperature. Can you imagine? Dude, Air Force, I'm telling you, stemless wine glasses, like, guys, it was tough. No. But I understood what they're doing. So when the yellings happen, when the disciplines happen, I was like, I know what's going on. I understand that you guys need to do this. And there were some people in there who did not get it, right? And they took it so hard, and they just couldn't get over it. And I was like, hey, guys, I was dorm chief at the time, a job that I loved, by the way, and took like way too seriously. I was like, I will shepherd you guys. And they're like, we don't want that. We're older than you. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, guys, I know this seems hard. It's 8 weeks. Like, pony up. It's not that big of a deal. You got to do a couple extra push-ups, push through it, okay? Like, big deal. It's 8 weeks. Who cares? You're going to be fine. It's all going to be better. One night, I was on dorm guard, and I hear this sound like this. I was like, what the heck is that? And then I hear screaming, and I go out into the hallway, and there's this guy in our flight. His name was Fadilla. So we were all trainees, trainee Fadilla. And he was on his hands and knees, and he was smashing his face into the ground. Blood everywhere, had broken his nose. He had a mental breakdown. And so I went up behind him, and I pretty much put him in a rear chokehold to save himself from himself. And this 21-year-old kid, right, trying to be this leader, something snapped in me in that moment, and I thought, man, you know what? There are moments, there are emotions, there is grief that get over it doesn't help. There are emotional states and needs that it'll all be better someday doesn't fix. And I remember thinking, as a 21-year-old kid, I was like, man, I want to be a leader who listens. I want to be a leader who is with. I want to be a leader who is present. I want to be a husband who listens, who values. I want to be a father who listens. And man, I'm telling you, there are some problems your kids come to you with, and you're just like, bro, oatmeal tastes the same in a blue bowl or an orange bowl, right? Life gets harder than this there. Let's get over it. But no matter how it manifests, grief is the same. Grief needs somebody to come alongside and speak value into, to be present with. So I thought, what is this component of loving that I believe is necessary? What can we do to these people that come across our path? We can give the gift of presence. Give the gift of presence. Be willing to look into their needs, to sit with them, to cry with them in grief, to celebrate with them in victory, to enter what's going on in theirs. And this is not something that we have to look for. This is something that comes across our path every day. We can train to humanize again. We can train to see people's needs again. But just the way that we had this progression to dehumanize, it's going to take us stepping in for that to become the norm. Rather than looking the other way, we have to look into people's eyes. We have to hear the story. We have to proclaim their value. We have to love even beyond ourselves. 2 nights ago, we got the movie, family movie night, and we had Free Willy 2 nights ago. One of my favorite movies growing up. And if you've seen the movie, the orphan, the kid in the movie, his name's Jesse. There's this one scene that there's not like a lot of attention to it. It's kind of a passing dialogue. I didn't even notice it. But the dialogue is when this police officer is talking to Jesse and said, "Your mom didn't want you. She dropped you off at the police station." And then they go on and keep talking. I'm telling you, it was like, you'd miss it if you watched it. So we're watching him for another 10 minutes, and then I look over, and my son, Gage, trying not to let anybody see, is bawling over there on the couch. And I was like, "Dude, what's going on?" And he's like, "I just don't want you guys to not want me and drop me off." Listen, without exaggeration, I tell my son, Gage, that I love him 50 times a day. I'm not exaggerating. It is a part of my vocabulary. It's something I care about. Every time I see him, I tell him how beautiful he is. Every time I see him. And still, in that moment, he had this worry that he didn't have value, worry that he was going to be forgotten. And I so easily could have said, "Dude, what are you talking about? I told you 3 minutes ago I love you," right? Instead, Kristen and I took turns, 10 minutes at a time, holding him, kissing him, reminding him how beautiful he is, telling him that we're never going anywhere, telling him that Daddy will run through walls for him. And I thought, in that moment, are our needs that different? Are our needs that different? Man, if 2020 is going to be a simply irresistible year, maybe it's the simplicity of taking the people who come across our path and speaking a simple word of value and love to them. Maybe what Mr. Rogers got right was the idea of giving the gift of presence to whoever came across his path. Let's pray. Oh, man. Yeah, Lord, even right now, it's a busy season for me, and I feel like my stoplight is just always on green. Just need you to switch it to yellow. Just need to reprioritize, just need to refocus. Need to take those steps to rehumanize. To instill the people that I come across with a sense of love and value. That it's not what they do, good or bad, it's who you claim that they are, that you call them your masterpiece. So Lord, our consistency is not what happens day to day. We are in a shifting landscape. But our consistency is what you say is true about us. Our consistency, our anchor is to your love. Would you allow us to be an extension of that love? Use our consistency of value to be other people's courage in their episodes. This week, we just want the sirens to go off. We want the alarm to go off when we come across somebody in our path that we recognize needs a conversation for us to be with them. Highlight that moment and give us the courage to step in, not knowing what it's going to require from us. In your precious name, amen. Phew! Good night. I feel like we should just, everyone's going to run out and just be weeping in Whataburger, right? We're just like, oh, I love you. And they're like, what do you want, chicken strips? Take it easy. All right. Oh, all right. Guys, I'm so glad that you are here today. I really am. And you need to know how much I cherish the conversations that I have out in the lobby. And I believe that this is not an exclusive club. That neighbor is an inclusive word and is using us to add to our neighborhood every single day. So see you here next week. Let's go love wealth. Oh, I almost forgot. Nice try to get out of here. We have a hashtag. Yeah, that's right. Social media, baby. We got a hashtag, Shoreline Neighbor. And here's what I would encourage you. If you meet somebody new, if you take that step or courageous enough to have a conversation, man, document it. We want to celebrate it with you. Take just a picture, maybe a summation of the story, whatever, and hashtag it Shoreline Neighbor. Because when that's a picture of me walking down Main Street of Huntington Beach with Gage. And I told him kind of something like this, and so he wanted to meet everybody that we came in contact with. And so I took a picture. So now I got to get a fresh one and hashtag it Shoreline Neighbor. So do it this week just so we can celebrate with you and invite with you.